Visiting with Executive Vice President and General Manager Nick Caserio here in studio. Nick, how's it going?
Fellas, good to see you.
Great to be with you. You mentioned something in your press conference about having the team together. If you had to play this weekend, you feel pretty good about these guys so far heading into the draft. How important is that before you actually start the draft?
Yeah, if you have an opportunity to kind of assemble a team, put the team in a position where if you had to go out there and play a game, you could do that, then your draft strategy is really dictated on, okay, let's just pick the best players regardless of the position that we feel are the right fits for our organization and the team. So I would say that's kind of what I was alluding to, with that, with that answer. So, we're hopeful that the players that we've added to the team, however many it's been, 16, 17, 18, however many players, that in some way they're going to be able to impact the team in a positive way. We'll get more information here as we go during the offseason and through training camp. But, hopefully the players that we've added could certainly help us.
I'm sure you probably don't know this, but you've won the offseason. I don't know if you knew this. I know you love that.
Paper champions.
Exactly. But the additions that you have made, Nick, and I'm trying to remember last time we talked, I think it was at the Combine. So there were a lot of them that we hadn't had a chance to talk to, but obviously the most recent one is the one that got a lot of people talking. And I know this. When I see you running somewhere, I don't really make much of it. I really don't, because you're always kind of running somewhere. But I happened to see you not 30 minutes before then. I was leaving the film office. I was just talking to Tommy, and all of a sudden you went flying by. I was like, oh, dang, I missed Nick. And then like 30 minutes later, there's a deal made for Stefon Diggs. I know you can't take us through everything, but getting Stefon, what does it mean for this team and this offense that you add a guy with his veteran qualities and making a deal for him?
Yeah, Steph's been a productive player throughout his career, so he's been pretty consistent. He's a pretty instinctive player, has good hands, has some position flexibility. So, we're fortunate to have some what we think are pretty good players at that position currently on the roster. But if you have an opportunity to add a player like Steph to the team, we thought it made sense for us to do. So it was something that we ultimately pursued and decided to go ahead through with the transaction. So we'll see how it goes when he get here, but certainly excited about Steph and what he can potentially do for our team.
Well, you have a lot of continuity, too. You have a lot of guys coming back, obviously. And this time of year, last year, we didn't really know what it was going to look like, Nick. But now we had a good glimpse with a division championship playoff victory. What about adding on to that? And in the draft, how do you go about that? Because it's not just the individuals, it's the chemistry as well.
Yeah, sure. No, a big part of it honestly starts with the coaching staff. So we're fortunate to have, let's say, continuity, on both sides of the ball, which then that trickles down to the players. So from understanding a system modification, adjustments, you're really just kind of making some changes on the fringes. It's not wholesale changes. So, we have a number of players on both sides of the ball that have experience in their respective systems, to include the kicking game. So as far as players that are drafted, they're essentially starting from scratch. So what we try to do is just find the players that have the right traits and characteristics, regardless of the system that they may have played in their respective school. Once they get here, we'll teach them and coach them the things that they need to go specific to our system. But it's just about identifying the right people with the right mindset and the right mentality. But I'd say if they're coachable, if they're willing to work, and they have a certain physical level of skill, then we can teach and train them the things that they need to do relative to being able to play their position at a productive level.
Nick, how much of, the right way of saying this, how much of a player, or say a free agent, how much of his skills and how they fit with everybody else are important, or the scheme that they played in, or what this guy plays on the left side, but he likes to play on the right. You bring in Diggs. How much does he complement Tank and Nico and the guys that are already there? How much does that matter in that process, or is it just, I'm going to get good football players that we think fit what we already have here?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's probably a combination of both, because once you get the player here, there's probably some trial and error that takes place. You may actually have them try something maybe a little bit different, see how they handle it. Okay, in the end, you know what, we're better off maybe doing something different, maybe something that they've already done or more comfortable doing. But to the second part of your question, it's about just trying to stack up as many good football players as possible. And once you get them in the building, our coaches do a great job of utilizing the players and putting them in a position where they can accentuate their skills. But the spring and the offseason is a time where you might be able to experiment a little bit, with a few different things. I'd say those are some of the advantages of the spring.
I remember it was a few months ago we were talking about you having pick number 23, and you sat in that chair and said, how do you know we're going to use that pick?
Yeah,
and
I fell right into that trap too, didn't I? I mean, I should know better. I should know better.
Trying to keep you on your toes.
59. Yeah.
Well, take us through the first round. What's it going to be like during the first round with you and the rest of the staff as you observe what's going on? And I know you guys have mocks and everything like that, so you're trying to see if you're right and just read the whole thing, right?
Yeah, no, that's a big part of it, Mark. I mean, we'll still kind of go through our process. So there's probably 15 or 20 players that are going to go. And then if you get to a point, if there's an opportunity that you feel makes sense that you want to get back into the first round, then we'd have to weigh the cost benefits of potentially doing that. But I think it goes back to just knowing as many players as possible, kind of a range of, where you think they may fall. And it's just relying on the information that you have. And there's a myriad of mocks that are available. Some are probably a little bit more accurate than others. But again, you're really just kind of adjusting and reacting to what's going on and kind of taking inventory. And then you're looking ahead to Friday if we don't pick on Thursday, which right now we're not scheduled to. But by the same token, if you get to a point where you feel like there's a player maybe that's standing out and you think that it's worth making the move, then if we were to do that, what's the cost associated with that? So I think more than anything, we've just always tried to create as much optionality for ourselves as possible. So we're in a decent position. If we don't do anything, we're hopeful that we'll get, 2 or 3 quality players on Friday. If we do have an opportunity on Thursday that makes sense, it'll be something for us to consider and discuss and ultimately just try to make the right decision at the present time.
Nick, two-parter. Number one, how close are you set on your board? Number two, do you set your board according to where you're drafting now? Like, for example, at 42, like you said, there are going to be some players that you probably aren't going to be able to get, but do you still set your board just in case one of those guys ends up start falling and it creates some questions? Hey, do we need to look at this because this guy's not falling in a range where we could do something?
This is why you assign a grade accordingly. So you put the board together, assign the grade of, and we do it in a way where a grade is commensurate with what we think their role is going to be for us. So you stack it accordingly. So you're not necessarily changing anything.
Right.
It's just you're positioning them similar to what you would do is if you had to pick at 23 or in the first round. So it doesn't really change anything there from a logistics standpoint. Now, from a strategy standpoint, that's where it's can maybe alter a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily affect the grading or we start moving players because we're in a different position than we were previously.
How many trades are not preset, but you've worked out general parameters on things? Hey, if this happens, we might be calling about this or that or the other thing. How much do you do that kind of thing?
That's a good question, Mark. I would say not a lot of teams are really willing to entertain that until probably actual draft day. And then a lot of it is contingent upon, you don't know who's going to be available or who's going to be there. So there may be some things on the front end if you're trying to position that you may try to get ahead of and say, all right, well, we'd be interested in whatever the pick is, right? Which I would say going back to last year, we had discussions leading up to the draft with Arizona about potentially moving. So you probably have more of those types of discussions. As far as any other discussions, it's going to really be in real time where you're reacting to kind of what's going on. And then what is a team's willingness to move in either direction? I think what we try to do is have an understanding philosophically of how that team maybe operates, what their willingness to move is. The trends definitely show you some teams are more willing to move than others. So you try to use all the information you have. But I'd say those are probably more real time as you start to get into the round as opposed to maybe at the top of the round.
Nick, I know you go to games throughout the year. You see games at various places, whether it's road trips or, games here, locally or whatever the case might be. But you get a chance to get to the Senior Bowl this year for the first time because you've had coaching decisions before that, but you get there. I know that because I saw you and I spoke, so it did happen. But when you go to the Senior Bowl and you see, or an All-Star game, and you see players up close and you see them in bulk, you see them all there, how much does that help you in particular? The scouts have a good idea because they've watched them a ton, but you might be seeing a couple of guys for the first time. How does that work for you seeing them for the first time live and in person?
It's always beneficial. And you're usually looking for maybe a few different things, or maybe you have some estimates and then you see a player in person. Oh, maybe he's a little bit bigger, maybe he's a little bit taller than you'd expected. I think one of the benefits, and actually this was the first year that I did this, was actually watch the practice from the field.
Yeah.
You just stand on the sidelines and you're just listening. You're just observing, whether it's communication, who's the signal caller, Who's making a call? Who's active with the information? Who's disseminating information to the rest of the group? Specifically, if you're talking about linebackers, and okay, are they a signal caller? Are they going to be a mic? Well, yeah, it looks like they could handle that. So those are some of the things, John, I would say probably that are more relevant than some of the other things. Not who wins the rep or what happens on this rep. You can get that off the film. So enjoyed being on a field and kind of enjoyed being around it, and it's just more observing and listening more than anything else.
Nick, you brought up the Hall of Fame game, and it's fantastic. Andre Johnson getting in, Texans playing in the game, but camp begins early, and it's going to be a longer period of time between the start of camp and the start of the regular season. How does that affect things? How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's an extra week. We'll have to look at the schedule and try to maximize our opportunities and ultimately just make sure we're doing the right thing by the players. So, we know they're going to training camp. Everybody is taxed. So just be smart about how we put that to schedule. We might have some things that we have to adjust and tweak as we go. We're going to kind of look at maybe some alternatives as well relative to practice and that type of structure. So you lose a week maybe in the off season, but you pick up a week in training camp. But by the same token, to your point, it's an extra week. So you just want to be smart about how you utilize the time. But, D'Amico and the staff will do a great job of kind of putting that together. So ultimately just trying to do what's right by the players and do what's best for the players every step of the way.
What's the biggest goal with a 30 visit, Nick? You were asked about this about the presser, and you made it clear it's not top 30, which, that's pretty clear. But what's the goal for everybody in the organization with that top 30 visit?
Yeah, it's just information. And it's just to get maybe a different viewpoint from maybe some others in the organization, in the building, which is why we kind of utilize the entire football operation. So because ultimately when a player walks in, he's going to interact with multiple people on multiple levels, not just scouting and coaching. There's other people that there's going to be touch points. So if you can create those touch points on the front end, get their feedback, their perspective, because a lot of those people have been in our building. They've been around our players. They've been with our team. This player, how he's going to assimilate into our group. So ultimately it comes down to information. You're trying to gather as much information so you have as clear of a picture on the player as possible, so that as you're projecting that player into the building, you have as good as you can understanding of what that player is going to bring when he walks through the doors.
Well, you have players that might have played with some of these college guys, right? Mm-hmm. And it happens with free agents too. So that information really flows into the mix.
Yes, absolutely. And it comes from anybody. And, we'll ask Jared Patterson, hey, what are your thoughts on so-and-so, right? Will Anderson, hey, Will, what are your thoughts here? Henry. So these players, they might know them better than we know them, and we'd be remiss if we didn't ask them for their opinion. So we respect and value their opinion, and I think when you're in our building after a year or two, you hopefully have an understanding of what's important, and you can make an honest assessment about how that player may do in our building.
Looking at the alma maters of guys you've drafted, you like the big schools, right? But I know you're not eliminating smaller schools. Or
what
whatever.
if there was somebody from John Carroll?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
Michael Hoyt came from Brown. He's now at the Rams.
Cecil Short's ears just picked up.
Exactly.
Anybody you drafted from BU this year? Oh, no,
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, we don't have a program
No
anymore,
football.
Sean.
That was mean.
Darn
Sorry.
it. But what goes into that? Because they do have outstanding competition, and maybe you see the matchups, you're getting a better idea of what the player can do.
Yeah, it's a part of it. But you're not necessarily going to eliminate a player maybe if he's at a lower level or a smaller program. I mean, I think what you're looking at, maybe does that player stand out relative to the competition? But the benefit of watching, call it the Power 5 schools, is that's probably a little bit more indicative of what we're going to see or face on a week-to-week basis. So it doesn't mean that every player that is on those teams is going to be in the NFL, but as best you can, try to get an understanding of how they fare against some of the better competition, because ultimately they're going to be playing against really good players on a week-to-week basis.
Okay, so the most fun thing that I love to do is ask you when we get in the season, okay, we've got the LA Rams coming up. Give us a scouting report. You can talk about all those players. You can talk about them, up and down the roster. You know them extremely well. So I'm going to ask this question, and it just happened to be the Rams. Now that he's retired, what was your scouting report on Aaron Donald way back in the day?
Yeah, he was explosive. I mean, that he jumped off the tape. Now, I'd say at the time, I think in whatever year he came out
14.
was. Yeah, our defensive system was a little bit different in New England. A player like that, I would say, wasn't like a premier necessarily fit. But I mean, the fact that he was 290 pounds and ran what he ran, you just don't see a defensive lineman move like that. And I would say each time we played the Rams, like we accounted for him pretty much on every snap. Because if you didn't, like he could, it's a little bit like JJ, like they could wreck the game.
Right.
So, but it's just how explosive, how powerful he was, despite being, call it a shorter, smaller player, but he was as strong as any player. And just his explosiveness and his quickness, you saw that jump off the tape when he was at Pitt.
So a lot of people after the fact will claim, well, I loved Aaron Donald back then, and I'm using Donald as an example. But is there a player that you look back now that's retired, that's out of the league, that you go, you know what, that was my guy. We missed the boat on that guy.
Oh man,
was there anybody that really stands out? Like, man, I had an inclination about this guy. We should have done it. We didn't do it, and that guy turned out to be a really good player somewhere else.
Yeah,
the one that got away.
Nobody jumps off, but I think you do. You always go back, John, and maybe take a look at what did we think coming out. All right, how did he actually play? So, and it usually goes both ways. Maybe you overvalue a player. Maybe he doesn't perform at the level that you expected. It happens. So I wouldn't say there's anybody in particular. I'm racking my brain that really, I'd say, jumps off at this point. So I'm sure we'll come up with somebody at some point.
All right, so part of the magic of working here at NRG Stadium is there are many other events going on. So the Rolling Stones are going to be in the weekend of the draft.
So I heard.
If Mick Jagger wants to see the draft room, you're going to allow him to have a peek? I mean,
what's funny, Brandon, I think they're actually going to be practicing during the draft on Friday and Saturday. So
man.
A little soundtrack.
We may have a few tunes being played while we're trying to get a player on the phone. So we'll see. So
have you been to any? I know you have the daughters. Have you been to any of the other events here at NRG Stadium since the season? Disney on Ice. You got Monster Truck. You have the rodeo. Have you been to some of these?
No, really. The only thing I've done, took my middle daughter to watch the Rockets play last week or the week before.
Oh, cool.
Against Golden State. But outside of that, my trips to NRG have been work related.
Yeah. People don't understand. This is the busy season.
Yeah, this is where we work. Yeah.
Okay, this is going to sound weird coming from me, but I feel like we're contractually obligated at this point to ask you. There is this uniform reveal on Tuesday. I'm not sure if you knew this. Your thoughts about new unis, and maybe you haven't even seen them.
I'm aware. Thoughts? Maybe I can get a new uniform. Maybe I can use new uniform.
Need new gear.
New vests.
See.
So that's what I would look forward to.
Okay. The new vest.
Get three matching vests. We'll wear them during our shows.
Need a whole collection. Nick, thanks a lot. Good luck.
Thanks, fellas.